Well, here we are. We are on the Wednesday edition of the Writ Race. Dave Trafford, John Wright here with you. Happy to welcome back Brett James. He's a senior counsel and a co-founder of Sussex Strategy here in Toronto. Good to have you back, Brett.
Thanks for having me.
When last we spoke, we were sort of at the front end of this campaign, and there was a lot of energy around it. Of course, there was lots of questions, namely, why are we here and what are we doing in this campaign? And we all assumed, I think, at some level, we would come away and form what was to be a ballot question. So let me put it to you this way, for both of you, John and Brett. What I've learned over the last 5 weeks, first, ballot questions don't matter. Platforms matter little. Whether or not you show any kind of character or integrity or stick to the plan in your platform matters little. We have seen shifting sands in all parties and all areas, and they've all had their gotcha moments with candidates doing stupid things and having to be pulled from the ranks. Brett, where does that put us a few days before an election that it would generally agree that nobody wanted?
Yeah, nobody wanted, and I recall our first discussion, and it was, I think, maybe 10 days in, and we talked about momentum for the Conservative Party because they kind of come out of the gate more aggressive than the others with a series of announcements. They'd rolled out a platform and seemed to be at least capturing the daily narrative and driving that with their own messaging. But John pointed out at the time that the polling really hadn't moved, and at least the seat projections really hadn't moved despite all of that. So we talked about where that might go. And I think, fast forward to the last waning days of the campaign, and I think we're very much in the same boat. I think the dynamic still exists where, despite everything that has happened in the intervening time and, damning books being published and debate schmozzles and the rollout of some really positive platform pieces across the board, actually, which is something I think we should also touch on today. The numbers really haven't moved a lot, except in, little, I'll call them subtle ways. John might say they're not quite so subtle, and I know there's a bigger theme that you've been discussing the last few days on the rise of the PPC and where they may be at. But otherwise, the net result, not a lot different than what we entered with, I think, at this particular juncture in time. And John, I'll be interested to hear if you feel differently, but the more every day that goes on, I think it all comes down to the 905 around Toronto, really.
Well, it's always come down to that 905 Lower Mainland group of voters. I do think that the Wildcard continues to be I don't call it the turnout, I call it the turn up. And that is, we don't know yet who the most aggressive voters to get to the polls are going to be. That's usually been a bonus in tight races in certain parts of the country for older people to get out and vote. I mean, we've always seen that demographic. I don't know whether that's going to be the case right now, but if it were the case and you were getting that extra bonus in the 905, that would make a big difference. So if the Liberals are a little anemic and you get more, then you're going to win a patch more of seats. I don't believe that the growing nature of the PPC is going to have that much of a significant impact on the overall race for the Conservatives. It's just not there. It's hovering at about 6% overall, and we know now from doing some further analysis that it's only representative within that 6% of about a third who voted Conservative last time. So, I mean, just take a third of 6% and you're ending up with 2. So it's not changing the dynamic that much. I wonder whether or not Quebec is going to change. And if that does, because of the involvement of the Premier and also because of Mr. OToole's offer to do more daycare there with a cash, grab for the province, whether that has an impact, because if he starts to pick up some seats there, then you start counting those along with the 905 and with perhaps the Lower Mainland. Grouping that together, though, I don't see a majority for either party. I just see a minority so far. If they were to hold the vote today, I think it would be, again, a minority, but it wouldn't be for anybody at the moment a majority.
Well, yesterday they popped into our feeds. I'm sure you guys all saw the Maclean's piece, and Gerald Butts was interviewed for Maclean's, and of course he is the former chief of staff for Justin Trudeau, saying in no uncertain terms this campaign is over, and he has basically framed it the way you've just said, John, that whatever goes on the campaign trail is almost irrelevant based on the need to actually drag people out of their homes and get them to put an X on a ballot on Monday.
Yeah. But I'd be interested in what Brett has to say of this, because I was out at a function last night. Believe it or not, I was in with a group of people. We were distanced, we were sitting, and we were talking, and they were fairly elite. And they started out by saying, that they, in fact, were going to vote against Mr. Trudeau at the beginning of the campaign. But it was interesting to see how they went through all the litany of these are the reasons why I won't vote for him, and then ended up with, I probably will vote for Mr. Trudeau again. And it was like, what? And it was like, yeah, well, O'Toole, I mean, he seems, I don't know what it is about his character, and I don't know what. So it wasn't being moved by the issues per se. It was being moved by, I just don't know him that well. And I responded, very politely by saying, yeah, but you just went through and you know the other guy. So even based on that, you're thinking about changing your mind and moving in the other direction. It was kind of like, well, we still have a couple of days to go. But I was interested in that dynamic where people still were fairly undecided, but were tilting back to the Liberals, even though they had such great apparent, like I was saying, apparent disgust for Mr. Trudeau. I don't know whether that's just an elite view or whether it's a view that can be put out there in other places. But Brett, I mean, do you think that vote for the Conservatives is soft at the moment and could go back?
Well, I think that I was trying to think of positives for the Trudeau campaign, because I think objectively there haven't been very many, and to me, the one that's of their own doing is their ability to use some of the traditional wedge issues that everybody knows is coming against a conservative leader, and make a little bit of hay on those. So sometimes some own goals on the conservative side by not handling the questions well when they should be well prepared. But, I think that I don't know if they made a lot of traction on the abortion issue. I do think that they did on the gun issue. And frankly, I don't think either side has much substance on the issue at all. I mean, on one, it's saying great things about banning stuff that's already been banned, and yet we've got, organized crime and gangs that are running rampant, might be a little bit of an exaggeration, but big issues in urban areas, and it does nothing to address those. On the other hand, you've got a leader, I think, that's tried to play it a little bit both ways in order to not alienate some people, and still sound very reasonable on the issue. And at the end of the day, I'm not sure that either has a lot of substance. But point being, the Liberals have they've sown that seed of doubt, and I think stemmed some momentum and bleed of their own soft supporters over to the Conservatives by sowing that doubt. And I think that speaks to what John was talking about in the dynamic of that event. The other, to me, the best moment for Trudeau in the campaign was when that idiot threw gravel at him. Like those protests have done more to have people feel a bit of sympathy or empathy for the Prime Minister than anything the Liberals did on their own. So personally, I think they welcomed all of those protests. I think it was the highlight of their campaign. I think it allowed them to show their leader as somebody who's doing his best under difficult circumstances, as prime ministerial, etc., in a way that they weren't doing on their own. So those were two highlights for me. And to John's point, it's really that sowing that seed of doubt, I think, that has really blunted that momentum that O'Toole might have had. And again, it's going to come down to that handful of ridings of whether or not people who, by and large, don't love Trudeau, open to somebody else, just how comfortable they feel. And not likely down to any one issue or a party's position. It'll be a feeling. Do I trust him? Do I not?
So when we talk about that sort of this fuzziness around it, and we're all having a hard time really kind of solidifying any foundational base for a vote here, except to say, well, I kind of like him. I mean, that can't be a clarion cry. I mean, I can't imagine that you were going to launch any campaign. You kind of like this guy, Brett, because that's just not going to resonate with people. We were talking to Scott White at the Conversation Canada earlier this week. And of course, Scott's a veteran of covering election campaigns, former editor-in-chief at CP and so on. He was at the National Post. You know, when we were talking about it, it became clear in that discussion that the 20th of September is not an end date, that in fact, it's just a pivot point. And it really, whoever wins here might well put interim in brackets beside their name and their new title as Prime Minister of this country, because it's clear we're going into this for a minority. It's clear there's going to be another election in 2 years. And I think that we haven't really talked about it, but it has occurred to me that perhaps the question we should be asking is the fatigue of the pandemic actually playing into this level of disinterest, this inability to kind of come up with something that we feel is important when we are faced with the pandemic over here, and we know that's important, and we want to get that out in front of us, dealt with, and we still know that there's runway there. We still know the fourth wave is coming. We still know we have to stand the economy up. And we seem to be kind of nibbling around the edges in what is, many will consider an unnecessary election. What role is that going to play in the coming months?
I think it's going to play a huge role, and it's not something that just started recently either. I mean, my own feeling is that the trust in our institutions and democracy itself has slowly been eroding, and we could spend a whole show talking about the where's, the whys of that. But I think that I'll draw an analogy, and for me it's medicine, and the generation that's older than I am had blind trust in whatever their doctor told them. Now, I'm a believer in the science. I double vax, let's be clear. I do my homework. But I also, like, when I have had to deal with family health situations, we go and get a second and a third opinion. That my parents, when I bring it up, they're a bit hesitant to do. They don't want to offend their doctor. And that belief in what they're being told is pretty rock solid. And that's fine. But they're not likely open to ideas other than what they believe. That is for me, I question more the generation younger than I am. They're not there at all. A doctor is just another person who's doing a job, who may or may not know what they're saying and be well qualified to do it. They're going to find their information from a lot of other places and make their own opinions based upon that. And I'm breaking it down simplistically by generation, but I think that extends over to the general faith in the institutions that, like, I didn't question when I was growing up. Did I know that sometimes we'd agree with the government on a policy or not when I was a kid? Sure, but whoever the prime minister was my prime minister. I don't agree, disagree. We'd sing the national anthem. It's our government. We're proud of, et cetera, and patriotic. All of those feelings, I think, are less and less as you go down the age categories. And I worry that the dynamic that you're talking about is one where it's a bit of a pox on all your houses as it relates to that pandemic fatigue. And understandably so. Like, I'm again somebody who I want to do the right thing. I want to listen to what I believe is being told for me that's for the broader public good, because that's how I'm wired. But I've heard myself saying to my kids, gang, we're going to do what we think it makes sense, because I don't know what any of them are saying, and I just can't listen to them anymore. So whoever is going to be dealing with this into the fourth wave, into other factors like the inflation numbers that came out today, it's going to be a mess, and they're going to have a very hard time, and they're going to be dealing with an electorate that is tired, as you said, Dave. And for that, I was thinking this morning, like if I'm Aaron O'Toole, I might be sitting there thinking, let's let Trudeau deal with all of this stuff. If he wins by 5-10 seats, a slimmer minority, we know we're going to be back into it in a couple of years. Let's let him deal with all this crap. I'll get ready for the next election. I think that wouldn't be a bad spot for him to finish up here.
Yeah, that whole thing, I can see it. Who really wants this job now, John?
Yeah, it's the wheel. It's the dog catch the wheel, right? And I agree with your hypothesis, Brett, all of it. I also want to add a layer to that because I think it also represents the divisive nature of politics that Mr. Trudeau has actually brought to the country. And I'm not saying this as a partisan, but when you have a country which starts with a majority, goes to a minority, and then goes to a minority after that, there's no upswing to it. It's almost the same circumstance. You would hope that there would be a prime minister or a leader of any province who would try and heal some things. I mean, that's what you're kind of supposed to stabilize the mood of the country. That hasn't, and I know I don't want to be Pollyannish in the sense that other prime ministers haven't gone after different parts of the country, but Alberta's never going to come close to adding any Liberal seats to what they've already got because they were targeted right after the majority happened to do away with the pipeline. Like they bought it in order to take it out and to deal with the economy that's going to cost so many jobs and everything else. There was nothing put in its place. Almost everything that has come forward in the last 18 months has been a fight. And has been used as a wedge. And so when we went into this campaign, it just said to me that there was nothing more to offer except that the campaign outcome has been based, again, on a series of negative wedges. Like everything that is being won is not about, we're going to do this for the country. We're going to bring, divisions together. There's no hope in this campaign, which leaves, I think, you and me and a bunch of other people from other parties, despite the fact we have to go and vote, it leaves this terrible feeling in our gut. I mean, what have we done in the last 6 weeks? We've had a group of people sharpen the spear, throw it, and keep people basically in the same places that they were before. We're making a terrible choice based on anger and divisiveness as opposed to hope and community. And I just think that's another layer that has to go on top of all of this because I just don't see how you can pound away at the differences of the politics in this country and not come away with a more divided country.
So is it by accident then that today, earlier this morning, the OToole campaign sends out a release that reads, "OToole promises to end Trudeau's divisive politics and broken promises"? Brett?
Well, again, their target has been those soft Liberals. I mean, clearly they're okay to lose a little bit on their right flank. And if that's to the PPC by and large, I think that they've been fine with that because that's not the path to winning. The path to winning has been those soft Liberals and bringing them over. And I said last time on, like the number one job Mr. O'Toole had was to show people I'm not a scary alternative. I've got some really middle of the road progressive policies I want to bring to Canada. So, I mean, within that, there was some hope, John. And one of the positives, if we're going to try to find some small positives out of this campaign, is I think there's been a spotlight on a few issues, and within those issues, a few positive ideas on how to address them. That got some airing that wouldn't have otherwise. Housing being one of the top of my list and different ways to tackle it. Some I disagree with, some I agree with, but a little more consensus on the role and the need for something to be done on a broad scale to address the housing disparity. Mental health got some early attention, which it has been gaining for a number of years, and I can see you both sitting there going, okay, well, we're talking provincial jurisdiction, because I've had those debates with people too, and it's easy for federal politicians to talk about stuff that really, at the end of the day, requires provinces to implement. Childcare being another one, and in general, supports for people who are either at home dealing with kids or at home dealing with aging parents, etc. there's been more attention. So I take little positives out of that, because parties that haven't always had good policies on that type of stuff now are baking that in, and I'd like to see that continue. But in terms of ending the divisiveness, Mr. Trudeau didn't invent the divisiveness. They just figured out a path to winning by exploiting it, and exploiting it really well. And it's not good for our long-term democracy. And I raise eyebrows, probably not in the circles of listeners that you have, but in others when I compare that to Donald Trump. Like it's similar in that there's a cohort of people that have bought into what I consider a cult of personality, and it doesn't matter what they do, what they say, how bad it may be, police investigations, ethics violations, doesn't matter. It's rock solid. And the divisiveness, I think, is also similar. There's very much if you either agree with me and I'm going to like you, or you don't agree with me and I'm sorry, you're over here. I'm going to talk to the people that I need to talk to. And the need for what John speaks to, I think, is critical to bring people together. But when you combine that with this erosion of belief and faith in our democracy and those institutions that underpin it, boy, oh boy, you've got a lethal concoction there that can really spiral out of control quickly. I've seen stats, and you may have your fingers on stats as well, of the those that are under 35, and the belief that capitalism may not be the best way forward. And there's a good, healthy debate, I understand, but to me, it's the bastardization of capitalism that makes them feel that way, not the fundamentals of what capitalism should be. There's a similar lack of faith in government institutions that we've talked about. These things are all boiling underneath the surface, and I think only going to grow over the next little while. And I don't pretend to have the solution. What I don't want to see is more and more politicians latching on to that for their own gains to use it, and that's a problem too.
So let's pick up on, just before we go, I want to kind of pick up on a note that you sounded for us last time you were on, and it sort of lends itself to what you were just talking about, and the role of social media. Certainly there has been that, siloed, barking in the dark, but somebody's there. It's very targeted. And I was looking it up, and after we talked to you about the amount of money being spent on digital campaigns, and it seems as though it has increased significantly over the last 2 or 3 weeks. What is your read of how that has played into either helping alleviate some of that misinformation, or it has actually driven more of a wedge there?
It's a tool that I believe is the most effective tool, regardless of your party and what issues you're trying to drive. And I talked about that before. And I had, I guess, a sad chuckle about, I read something this morning about how, last time the Taliban was in power in Afghanistan, they tried to eliminate the internet in Afghanistan and get rid of they banned social media. Now they've realized they want to use it, and use it for their own propaganda, and use it to portray a softer, gentler Taliban, which I don't think exists. But you've got the same kind of dynamic here, in that it's a tool that you cannot ignore. It is the most effective way to say what you want to say to the people you need to say it to directly. And you talked in one of your previous episodes about the organized protests that are out there, and it's easy to think that maybe the anger's greater, or that there are more people pissed off with government than normal. I'm not sure that that's the case, but John, you made the point that they're better organized. I think it's purely social media. It allows them to be better, more organized, cheaply, easily, effectively. Sadly, some of that has turned into protests in front of our hospitals, which I actually think has damaged their cause significantly. If I was thinking PPC because I'm kind of pissed off, and I just, to hell with all the other parties, but I see the people who clearly are associated with that party doing things like that, it might actually cause me to back away, even if I'm disgruntled.
John, on the numbers, and I know that we'll be parsing these right through until like 3 days after the election, but you both started off by talking about where the important battlegrounds are as we head into this, the end of the week, into the weekend. The ground game is important, agreed. But is it fair to be sort of lumping all of the GTA vote together? It seems to me, and again, we talk about the efficiency of the vote. We can't, in the same way we can't talk about the national number being all that meaningful and who's going to form a government. If you're talking about really winning, the 416 is overweighted for Liberals. So should we not be saying 905 and not GTA? And I say that in a nuanced way to exclude the 416 because I'm seeing numbers around the GTA and that would include Toronto. So it's hard to, actually look at them and say, wow, look at the Liberals are just blowing it out of the water here.
You're absolutely right. I mean, Toronto's going to stay the way it is. And in fact, even in Carolyn Bennett's riding that might have been up for grabs, I mean, with the NDP provincially and then with a strong NDP character who we could have in the riding gone one way or the other, she resigned this morning. I mean, she's gone. So, I mean, there's another Liberal seat, and there you go. The only movement is going to be in the 905. The only movement potentially is out where Aaron O'Toole is standing on the weekend in there in Whitby and trying to do some, some shoring up or get the vote out. I think you're absolutely right. This goes down from the 905 around Toronto down into the Niagara Beltway. That's kind of, if that starts to change, that's what we're going to see move, but it's not going to be Toronto.
So we've asked everybody the last week as we've signed off, Brett, what's Monday night going to look like?
A very slim minority for somebody is my view.
That's courageous.
Yeah, thanks. But there really is no other answer. I certainly, it's interesting. You talk to those close to probably the same in each campaign, and pollsters working for the Conservatives, and they believe there's some underlying numbers that mean that they're definitely going to pull it out on election night. And say, okay, I don't see it in the general stuff, but there have been a lot of surprises over the last number of elections that didn't seem to get caught in the general polling, and we'll see if we got another one of those on Monday night.
Yeah, well, they're all right now sitting on top of each other, so we'll see who's sitting on top of the world come Monday. Brett James, it's good of you to join us. Thanks for being here.
Great to be here, and look forward to Monday night.
Brett James is co-founder at Sussex Strategy. John Wright, of course, he is the co-host here. I'm Dave Trafford. This is The Writ Race. It's an Eye Contact podcast.